The night was colder than usual. The streetlights flickered weakly, throwing pale light over the empty road. The city seemed asleep, yet the silence carried a weight, as if something unseen was watching from the shadows. A man named Daniel walked slowly down the cracked pavement. His hands carried a small bag filled with leftover food. Every night after work, he would take the food that was not sold or left behind and share it with stray dogs in the city. It had become his quiet ritual, something that gave him peace in a world that often felt cruel. His shoes crunched against scattered gravel. The only sound breaking the still air was the distant barking of hungry dogs. Daniel turned into a narrow alley, the same one he had visited many times before. The alley smelled of damp bricks and old trash, but it was where the strays often gathered. He crouched down near a broken wall and opened the bag. Slowly he pulled out pieces of bread and some scraps of meat. He placed them gently on the ground. Whistling softly to call the dogs normally, he would hear their paws tapping against the road, or see their eager eyes shining in the dark. But tonight felt different. Daniel looked around. His breath made small clouds in the cold air. The alley was strangely silent. No paws, no wagging tails, no sound of dogs running toward the food. Instead, he felt eyes on him. Not the familiar eyes of strays, but something else, something sharper, something that made the hair on the back of his neck rise. He straightened slowly, his heartbeat quickening. The bag slipped a little in his hand. He turned his head and froze at the far end of the alley. Two small figures stood in the shadows. At first, Daniel thought they were children, lost and wandering at night. But as his eyes adjusted to the dim light, he realized they were not normal children. Their eyes glowed faintly, shimmering with an otherworldly light. Their faces were thin, pale, and marked by exhaustion. Their clothes were torn, barely covering their fragile bodies. The taller one leaned against the wall, her breathing shallow. The smaller one clutched her arm tightly, both of them trembling as if the cold air had been eating at their bones for days. They stared at Daniel, not with anger, not with fear, but with a hunger so deep it looked painful. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. He blinked, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Were they real? Were these just starving kids with strange eyes? Or was his mind playing tricks on him? But then, the smaller figure took a weak step forward. Her voice cracked like dry paper, soft but desperate. "Food, please," she whispered. The word cut through the cold night like a knife. Daniel's hand tightened around the bag. He felt his heart pound against his chest. For a moment he could not move. His instincts screamed at him. This was dangerous. These were not strays, not even normal people. They were something else, something alien. The taller girl tried to pull her companion back, as if warning her not to beg, but her strength failed, and both of them sank slowly to the ground, too weak to keep standing, too starved to keep fighting their own bodies. Daniel stood frozen in the middle of the alley, torn between fear and compassion. His mind raced with questions. What were they doing here? How did they survive this long? Were they running from someone? The glowing eyes looked at him again, pleading, trembling, broken. The bag of food in his hand suddenly felt heavier than ever before. He had carried it for the dogs, but now it seemed like fate had placed him in this alley at this exact moment. He took a slow step toward them. The gravel crunched under his foot. The girls flinched, their eyes widening as if expecting harm. Daniel raised his hands gently, showing them he meant no threat. I have food," he said quietly, his voice shaking. The smaller one's lips parted and tears welled up in her glowing eyes. The taller girl wrapped an arm around her, as if afraid someone would snatch the hope away. Daniel placed the bag down on the ground and carefully pushed it toward them. His breath quickened as he watched the two girls reach for it. Their hands shook as they tore into the bread and scraps, eating as if they had not tasted food in days, maybe weeks. For the first time, Daniel noticed how thin they really were. Their bones pressed against their skin, and their faces carried the look of endless suffering. They ate in silence, only the sound of chewing and small gasps filling the cold air. Daniel looked around nervously. Fear crawled through his spine. What if someone else saw this? What if the rumors were true? There had been whispers about alien refugees hiding in the city, hunted by men who called them property. Helping them could mean danger, punishment, or worse, and yet Daniel could not walk away. The alley felt colder, the night darker, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Two glowing eyes lifted from the food and locked onto him again, filled with gratitude but also fear. Daniel knew one thing for certain. His quiet life was no longer quiet. The night he came to feed stray dogs had turned into something much larger, something that would test the limits of his courage, and deep inside he felt it. This was only the beginning. Daniel stayed frozen in place. His breath came out in small clouds, and his eyes stayed locked on the two strange girls. They were no longer just shadows in the alley. They were real, fragile, and starving before his eyes. The smaller one clutched a piece of bread so tightly it almost broke apart in her hand. She ate in tiny bites at first, as if afraid it would be taken away. Then hunger overcame fear and she devoured it quickly, crumbs falling down her chin. The taller one ate slower, her glowing eyes flicking toward Daniel between each bite. Suspicion lived in her gaze, as if she could not decide whether he was a savior or a trap. Daniel's chest tightened. They looked so young, younger than he had first thought, perhaps no older than teenagers. Yet their faces carried a kind of pain and survival that no child should ever know. Their skin, pale and marked with faint glowing patterns, shimmered faintly beneath the weak streetlight. "Who are you?" Daniel whispered to himself. His words were not meant to be heard, but the smaller girl lifted her head anyway. Her lips trembled as if she wanted to answer, but the taller one pressed a hand against her arm. Shaking her head firmly, silence filled the alley again, except for the sound of chewing and shallow breathing. Daniel glanced toward the street. His heart raced. What if someone saw them here? He had heard stories, alien runaways, hunted down like animals. Some people said they were dangerous. Others said they were worth money. But what he saw right now was not danger. It was desperation. He took a cautious step closer. The taller girl instantly stiffened, her glowing eyes narrowing. She shifted slightly in front of the smaller one. As if to shield her, it was a protective gesture, one Daniel recognized well. "It's okay," he said quietly, raising his hands again. "I won't hurt you." For a long moment, they only stared. The taller girl's body trembled, not just from fear but from exhaustion. Her strength was barely enough to keep herself upright. Daniel could see her knees shaking. The smaller one, with crumbs still on her lips, whispered again. Her voice was so faint it almost vanished into the night air. "Thank you." The words were soft but powerful. They carried more weight than Daniel expected. He swallowed hard, his throat dry. He wanted to ask questions, where they came from, why they were here, who was after them, but he could see the fear in their eyes. Pressing them now would only break whatever fragile trust had just formed. Instead, he crouched slowly to their level. His knees touched the cold ground, and he slid another piece of food toward them. The taller girl hesitated, her thin fingers trembling as she reached out. She grabbed it quickly, almost like an animal stealing something precious, and pulled it close to her chest before eating. Daniel studied them closely now. Their features were not human, yet not entirely alien either. Their ears were slightly pointed, their eyes glowing softly as if lit from within, and their skin carried faint lines of bioluminescent patterns that pulsed slowly, like quiet rivers of light. It was both haunting and strangely beautiful. As the food disappeared, Daniel noticed how their shoulders began to relax, how their breathing slowed. They were still weak, but the sharp edge of starvation had dulled. Then from somewhere beyond the alley came the sound of voices, heavy boots thudding against pavement, men talking in low, harsh tones. The sound made the taller girl's head snap toward the street. Her glowing eyes widened with terror. "No," she whispered. Gripping the smaller one's hand tightly, Daniel froze. He could not understand the words the men were saying, but the tone was enough, searching, commanding, dangerous. His instincts told him these were not simple passers-by. Whoever they were looking for something, or someone. The smaller girl whimpered and tried to press herself deeper against the wall. The taller one looked at Daniel with desperate eyes now. Her silent gaze was louder than any words. She was begging him, pleading without a sound. Daniel's pulse raced. He felt the weight of the moment. He could walk away, pretend he had never seen them, keep himself safe. But the image of their trembling hands, their broken voices, and their glowing eyes carved into his heart. "Stay quiet," Daniel whispered, his voice low but firm. He pointed to the corner of the alley where shadows were thickest. "Hide there, don't move." The taller girl hesitated for only a second, then nodded. She pulled the smaller one with her, both of them crouching low against the wall. Their glowing eyes dimmed as if they were trying to make themselves disappear. Daniel stood, his body tense, his hands clenched into fists even though he had nothing to fight with. The voices grew closer, the boots louder. Shadows stretched across the mouth of the alley. Daniel's mind screamed at him to leave, to save himself, but his heart stayed firm. He could not abandon them. As the men's voices echoed closer, Daniel turned his head slightly. His eyes met the glowing eyes of the two alien girls one last time. They were terrified, fragile, but in their stare was something else. Hope. Fragile and small but alive. Daniel drew in a shaky breath. The night around him seemed to tighten. The cold street, once empty and harmless, now felt like the stage of a dangerous game, and Daniel knew deep inside that feeding these girls was not the end. It was only the beginning of something that could change his entire life. The cold air felt heavier as the voices drew closer. Daniel stood at the mouth of the alley, his pulse hammering in his ears. The crunch of boots against broken pavement echoed closer, mixed with the sharp click of metal. Whoever these men were, they carried weapons. Daniel glanced back into the shadows. The two alien girls crouched low, their glowing eyes dimmed as much as they could. The taller one held the smaller girl tightly, shielding her trembling body. Their faces carried one message: fear. The men stopped near the alley entrance. Their voices were low but harsh. Daniel could not understand the language they spoke, but he could feel the meaning. They were searching. Daniel swallowed hard. His chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. He had no reason to risk himself, no reason to protect strangers. Yet as he looked at the starving girls hiding in the dark, he knew walking away was no longer an option. One of the men stepped into the alley. His flashlight beam cut through the shadows, landing on the broken walls and piles of trash. The light swept closer, inch by inch. Daniel's body tensed. Without thinking, Daniel moved. He stepped forward, putting himself in the open. The beam of light hit his chest, blinding him for a second. "Hey!" a rough voice barked. The man's tone carried suspicion. The light shifted, scanning Daniel from head to toe. Daniel forced his voice steady. "Just feeding strays," he said, holding up the empty food bag as proof. His heart pounded so hard he thought they could hear it. The man grunted, muttering something over his shoulder. Another voice answered from outside the alley. Then the light moved past Daniel. Shining deeper into the shadows, Daniel's stomach clenched. If the beam moved just a few feet more, it would reveal the girls quickly. Daniel stepped sideways, blocking the light with his body. He forced a tired laugh. "Not much here tonight," he said. "Dogs didn't even show up." The man narrowed his eyes. Suspicious, he took another step forward, the light flickering across Daniel's face. Daniel's palms were sweaty. He knew he could not hold this act for long. If they searched further, if they stepped into the dark corner, the girls would be exposed. The taller girl shifted slightly, clutching the smaller one. Daniel caught the movement from the corner of his eye, and panic surged. He spoke quickly, trying to pull attention back to himself. "Cold night, huh?" he said, forcing a casual tone. "Don't think even the dogs want to be out." The man studied him for a long moment. The silence stretched painfully. Finally, the voice outside barked another order. The man with the flashlight gave Daniel one last suspicious glance, then turned away. The footsteps retreated slowly, voices fading into the distance. The alley fell silent again. Daniel's shoulders sagged. His whole body trembled with the weight of fear leaving him. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. From the shadows, the girl stirred. The smaller one let out a quiet sob, muffled against the taller girl's chest. The taller one's glowing eyes flickered toward Daniel. Her gaze was sharp but filled with something new: respect, trust, maybe even gratitude. Daniel walked back to them slowly, crouching down again. "They're gone," he whispered. "You're safe. For now." The taller girl stared at him, her lips parting slightly. She seemed to want to say something but stopped herself. Instead, she gave a small nod, her grip on her sister tightening. Daniel rubbed his face with both hands. His mind was spinning. He had just lied to armed men, put himself in danger for two strangers, for two alien girls he knew nothing about. He should have left. He should have walked away. But he couldn't, looking at them, their thin bodies trembling in the cold, their glowing eyes heavy with suffering. He knew he could not leave them here. If those men came back, if others were searching, the girls wouldn't last the night. Daniel's throat tightened. The decision was heavy. Heavier than anything he had ever faced. He whispered to himself, "If I help them, my life changes forever." The taller girl's eyes met his as if she had heard his thoughts. There was no sound in the alley except the faint whistle of the wind. But in that silence, Daniel felt the weight of the moment. Finally, he made his choice. "Come with me," he said softly. "You can't stay here." The smaller girl blinked. her glowing eyes filling with tears. The taller one hesitated, suspicion battling with desperation. She looked down at her sister, then back at Daniel. After a long pause, she gave the smallest nod. Daniel stood and extended his hand, his palm shook slightly. The taller girl stared at it for a moment before slowly placing her hand in his. Her skin was cold, fragile but alive. Daniel helped her stand, then the smaller one. Their legs wobbled, their bodies weak, but they leaned against him for support. Together they stepped out of the shadows, leaving behind the scraps of food and the alley that had nearly become their grave. The street stretched ahead, dark and silent. Danger still lingered, but Daniel's heart was set. He had chosen. And from this night on, there would be no turning back. The streets were quiet, but Daniel felt danger in every shadow. His steps were careful, his ears sharp for any sound of boots or voices. The two alien girls clung close to him, their fragile bodies leaning against his for balance. Their glowing eyes flickered with fear, dimmed as if they wished to disappear completely. Daniel guided them away from the main road. Down side streets he knew well. He had walked this city for years, and he knew which alleys twisted into dead ends, which corners the patrols avoided. The girls followed without a word, their silence heavy. Every few steps the smaller one coughed weakly, a thin sound that made Daniel's chest ache. Finally, they reached an abandoned warehouse near the edge of the district. The building was old, its bricks cracked, its roof sagging. Most people ignored it, too broken to be of use, too forgotten to matter. For Daniel, it was the only place he could think of, a shelter hidden in the shadows. He pushed open the rusted door, the hinges screeching softly. Inside, the air smelled of dust and iron. The moonlight slipped through broken windows, painting pale patterns on the floor. Daniel stepped inside first, checking the corners. No one had been here in years. Only silence and shadows greeted him. "Come in," he whispered. Holding the door for them, the taller girl hesitated, her glowing eyes scanning the dark interior as if searching for a trap. But the smaller one tugged her hand and shuffled forward, hunger and exhaustion winning over fear. Together they stepped inside, their footsteps barely making a sound. Daniel closed the door behind them. The outside world vanished, leaving only the stillness of the warehouse. For the first time that night, Daniel felt a tiny sense of safety, fragile but real. He led them toward a corner where old crates were stacked, forming a small space that could shield them from view. "Sit here," he said gently, lowering his voice as if speaking too loudly might shatter the moment. The girls sank to the ground, leaning against each other. Their faces were pale, but now, with food in their stomachs and walls around them, they seemed slightly less on the edge of collapse. Daniel crouched in front of them, studying their strange features under the dim light. Their faint bioluminescent lines glowed softly, tracing across their arms and necks like hidden veins of starlight. The taller one's face was sharp yet delicate, her jaw tight with suspicion. The smaller one's rounder face carried innocence, though hunger and fear had carved away much of her childhood softness. For a long moment no one spoke. Daniel wanted to ask questions, but he held back. He could sense that pushing them now would close the fragile door of trust that had barely opened. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out the last piece of bread he had saved. He broke it in half and held it out. The smaller girl reached for it quickly, but the taller one placed a hand on her arm. Stopping her, she looked at Daniel with sharp, glowing eyes, her expression unreadable. "It's okay," Daniel said softly, offering it again. "It's yours." The taller girl's hand trembled, but after a long pause, she took it, breaking it in half again and giving the bigger piece to the younger one. Daniel noticed this and felt something stir inside him. She was protecting her even in hunger. The smaller girl ate with quiet gasps while the taller one chewed slowly, her eyes never leaving Daniel. Finally, the silence broke. "Why?" the taller girl whispered. Her voice was weak but firm. "Why?" "Help us," Daniel blinked. Caught off guard, he searched for an answer, but all he had was the truth. "You looked hungry," he said simply. "And afraid." The taller girl's glowing eyes softened for a brief second before hardening again. She pressed her lips together, as if struggling between trust and caution. The smaller one wiped her mouth with her sleeve, her voice fragile but hopeful. We were running." The taller girl shot her a warning glance, but the words were already spoken. Daniel leaned forward slightly. "Running from who?" he asked quietly. The taller girl looked down, her jaw tightening. For a moment, Daniel thought she wouldn't answer. But then she whispered one word that chilled him. Hunters. The sound of it filled the warehouse with a new kind of silence. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. The word carried danger, shadows, and blood. Whoever these hunters were, they were close. The smaller girl's eyes brimmed with tears. She clung to her sister, whispering something in a language Daniel didn't understand. The taller one held her close, her glowing lines pulsing faintly as if her fear made them brighter. Daniel sat back, his heart pounded. He had thought he was just feeding strays. Then he thought he was just saving two starving strangers. But now he understood the weight of his choice. These were not just refugees. They were prey, and someone out there was determined to claim them. He rubbed his forehead. His life had already changed tonight, and it would change even more by morning. Yet when he looked at them, two fragile souls trembling in the shadows, he knew he could not abandon them. "You can stay here tonight," Daniel said firmly. "It's not much." But no one comes here. The smaller girl's glowing eyes widened with relief. She leaned against her sister, her breathing slowing. The taller one studied him for a long, silent moment, then at last she gave a small nod. Daniel leaned back against the wall. Exhaustion washing over him. Outside, the city kept sleeping, unaware that inside a forgotten warehouse, a man and two alien girls had just formed a fragile bond. And though Daniel tried to tell himself this was only for one night, deep down he knew the truth. The hunters were real, the danger was close, and this was only the beginning. The warehouse was silent, dust floating in the pale beams of moonlight slipping through cracked windows. Daniel leaned against the wall, his body heavy with exhaustion. He had brought the girls here for one night, but deep down he knew things had already gone too far for him to walk away. The smaller girl had curled against her sister, finally drifting into uneasy sleep. Her soft breaths filled the space, broken by an occasional cough. The taller one, however, stayed awake, her glowing eyes fixed on Daniel. She sat with her back to the crates, arms wrapped around her sister protectively. For a long time neither spoke. Daniel could feel her suspicion, the weight of her gaze. He rubbed his hands together, trying to gather warmth. Finally, he broke the silence. "You said hunters," he whispered, careful not to wake the younger one. "Who are they? Why are they after you?" The taller girl's jaw tightened. For a moment she looked away, her glowing patterns dimming. Daniel thought she would stay silent forever. But slowly she turned her eyes back to him. "They call us property," she said, her voice low but firm. "To them we are not people. We are things to be sold, used, broken." Daniel felt his stomach knot. He had heard rumors of alien trafficking, whispers of colonies destroyed, families captured. But hearing it spoken like this from the trembling lips of a starving girl made it painfully real. Where are you from?" Daniel asked carefully. The taller girl's expression softened for just a moment. Memories flickered in her eyes. "A colony," she whispered. "Far from here. It was home until the fire came." Her voice shook, and she tightened her arms around her sister. "They came with ships, burned our homes, took survivors. We escaped. But many didn't." Daniel's throat tightened. He could see the pain written across her face, the weight of memories too heavy for someone her age. He glanced at the smaller one sleeping fitfully, clutching her sister's torn sleeve even in dreams. "And now," the taller girl continued, her voice growing colder, "we run, always running, always hiding." Daniel felt anger stir in his chest. He had seen cruelty before on the streets, in the way the powerful preyed on the weak. But this was different. This was bigger, darker. "What's your name?" Daniel asked softly. His question broke the heavy silence. The taller girl blinked. As if surprised, she hesitated, then whispered, "Lyra?" She glanced at the smaller one, her voice gentler now. "And she is Nira." Daniel repeated the names quietly, committing them to memory. Names made them more than strangers, more than refugees. They were people, they were real. Lyra studied him carefully. "And you?" "Daniel," he answered, offering a small, tired smile. "Just Daniel." For the first time, Lyra's gaze softened, though suspicion still lingered. Her glowing eyes dimmed slightly. No longer sharp with fear, silence returned. Heavy, but less hostile. Daniel leaned back against the cold wall. His mind raced. He had just learned the truth. They were hunted, not for crimes but for existing, and by helping them. He had painted a target on himself, yet when he looked at them, Lyra awake, guarding her sister even in exhaustion, and Nira dreaming with crumbs still on her lips. He felt something stronger than fear. He felt responsibility. Suddenly, Nira stirred in her sleep, mumbling weak words in her strange language. Her glowing patterns flickered faintly across her arms. Daniel watched in awe. The light pulsed like the rhythm of a heartbeat. Soft but alive, Lyra noticed his stare and stiffened, pulling her sister's arm under the torn cloth to hide the glow. "What was that?" Daniel asked quietly, curiosity breaking through his fear. Lyra's eyes narrowed. "It is our blood," she said, her tone sharp. "Our curse, our value. The hunters take us for this. They believe it makes us powerful, useful." Daniel frowned. "Useful how?" She looked away, her jaw hardening. "Weapons, experiments, whatever they want, to them, it doesn't matter." Her words cut through Daniel like cold steel. He felt his hands clench into fists. The thought of men chasing these fragile girls for glowing patterns in their skin filled him with rage. "You're not property," Daniel said firmly, surprising himself with the strength in his voice. "You're not things to be used." Lyra's eyes widened. For a second, she looked younger, almost like the child she should have been, not the hardened survivor she had become. Her lips parted as if she wanted to argue, but no words came. Instead, she whispered, "Why do you care? You don't even know us." Daniel hesitated, searching for words. Finally, he said, "Because I can't watch someone suffer and do nothing. Not anymore." The silence that followed was heavy but different now. Less like suspicion, more like fragile trust forming in the shadows. Nira whimpered softly in her sleep. Clinging to her sister tighter, Lyra stroked her hair gently. Her glowing eyes lifted back to Daniel, and for the first time, there was no wall between them, only pain and the smallest spark of hope. Daniel leaned his head back against the wall, exhaustion pulling at him. He knew the danger was real. He knew the hunters would not stop, but as he looked at Lyra and Nira huddled together in the corner of the warehouse, he made a quiet promise to himself. No matter what came, he would not let them be taken. The night pressed on, cold and silent, but inside the warehouse a fragile bond had been formed, and that bond was stronger than fear. The warehouse was still, the kind of silence that pressed against the skin. Daniel sat near the door, his back to the cold wall. His eyes were heavy with exhaustion, but his mind refused to rest. Every creak of wood, every groan of old metal made him tense. In the corner, Lyra held Nira close. The younger girl finally slept. Her glowing patterns dimmed as if even her body knew to hide. Lyra stayed awake, her eyes never fully closing. She watched Daniel with quiet suspicion. Though less sharp than before, hours passed like this, slow and heavy, until a sound cut through the quiet boots. The rhythmic thud of many feet against pavement echoed from outside. Low voices carried through the night. Daniel's head snapped up, his heart skipped. Lyra stiffened instantly, her glowing eyes wide with terror. She whispered something sharp in her language and shook Nira awake. The smaller girl stirred, confused, until she heard the sound too. Her whole body trembled. Daniel rose quickly and moved to the door, pressing his ear against the cold metal. The voices were clearer now, deep, harsh, commanding. He couldn't understand the words, but he didn't need to. The tone said everything. "The hunters had arrived. They found us," Lyra whispered, her voice breaking. She pulled Nira tighter, her glowing lines flickering bright with fear. Daniel's chest tightened. He had known this was coming, but the speed of it shook him. He glanced around the warehouse. There was nowhere safe. Only broken crates, rusted beams, shadows that wouldn't hold for long. The boots grew louder, spreading across the street, searching, scanning. Daniel could see faint beams of light moving outside the cracked windows. Nira whimpered, and Daniel quickly crouched beside them. "Quiet," he whispered. "Don't make a sound." Lyra's jaw was tight, her hands gripping her sister's shoulders as if her strength alone could shield them. Her glowing eyes met Daniel's, filled with panic and something else, trust. Fragile but real. The hunters' voices grew sharper. Closer, Daniel's pulse pounded. He knew if they opened the door, there would be no escape. He scanned the warehouse desperately. His eyes landed on a collapsed section of the wall near the back. Bricks broken and a narrow gap opening into the alley behind. Small, dangerous, but it could be a way out. Daniel pointed toward it quickly. "There. Go," he whispered urgently. Lyra looked at the hole, then back at him, doubt flickering across her face. "Too small," she whispered. "Too risky." "It's better than waiting here," Daniel hissed. The boots stopped just outside, a shadow moving past the crack in the door. He felt his breath catch, then the metal door rattled. A loud bang echoed through the warehouse as someone tried the handle. Dust rained from the ceiling. Nira gasped and buried her face against her sister. Daniel's heart hammered. He turned to Lyra, his voice sharp but low. "Take her and go now." Lyra hesitated, her eyes darting between Daniel and the door that shook again under another heavy blow. The hunters barked something in their harsh language. The sound of metal scraping followed. They were trying to force the lock. Finally, Lyra nodded. She pulled Nira to her feet and half-dragged her toward the broken wall. The smaller girl stumbled, her legs weak, but Lyra didn't stop. Daniel grabbed a heavy piece of pipe from the floor. His hands trembled, but his grip was tight. He stood near the door, his body tense. If they came through, he would buy the girls time. The door screeched under pressure. The lock bent. Daniel raised the pipe, his breath loud in his ears. He glanced back once. Lyra was pushing Nira through the gap in the wall, the smaller girl squeezing through with tears streaming down her face. Lyra looked back at him, her glowing eyes wide with fear and something else, a silent plea. "Go," Daniel mouthed with one last push. Lyra slipped through the gap, vanishing into the shadows outside. The door burst open, metal crashed against the wall, and 3 hunters stormed in. Their figures were tall, armored, their faces hidden under masks with glowing visors. Their weapons gleamed in the dim light. Daniel stood alone before them. Pipe in hand, his knees shook, but he did not move back. The hunters froze for a moment, surprised to see only a man. Then one of them barked a laugh, the sound metallic and cruel. Daniel tightened his grip, forcing himself to meet their gaze. He was no fighter, no soldier, but tonight he was a wall between monsters and the 2 fragile lives he had chosen to protect. The hunters spread out, scanning the warehouse. One of them spoke sharply, pointing toward the back where dust still hung in the air from the girl's escape. Daniel's stomach dropped. They knew without thinking. He stepped forward, swinging the pipe with all his strength. It clashed against the hunter's armor with a loud clang. The force jolted through his arms, pain shooting up his wrists. The hunter barely staggered, but the blow was enough to grab their full attention. "Over here," Daniel shouted, his voice echoing in the warehouse. "It's me you want." The hunters turned toward him, their visors glowing like cold fire, weapons raised. Their boots pounded the floor as they closed in. Daniel's chest burned with fear, but he planted his feet. Every second he held them here was another second for Lyra and Nira to escape, another chance for them to live. The warehouse filled with the sound of heavy steps, sharp commands, and Daniel's ragged breaths. The hunters had come, and there was no turning back. The warehouse shook with the sound of boots, metal scraping against concrete, and harsh voices shouting in a language Daniel could not understand. He stood in the middle of the dusty floor, gripping the rusted pipe in his hands. His heart thundered, but his eyes stayed fixed on the 3 hunters who had forced their way inside. Their glowing visors scanned the space, weapons ready. They expected prey, weak, trembling, easy to capture. Instead, they found Daniel, an ordinary human man standing tall. One hunter barked a command and pointed toward the back wall where the dust still hung in the air from Lyra and Nira's escape. They knew someone had fled. They were ready to pursue. Daniel's chest tightened. He had seconds to decide. His mind screamed at him to run, to save his own life, but his heart burned with something stronger. He thought of Nira's trembling hands clutching bread, of Lyra's glowing eyes filled with both fear and stubborn courage. He couldn't let the hunters take them, not while he still stood. He took a shaky step forward, pipe raised like a weapon. "You'll have to go through me," he said. His voice shook, but the words carried weight. The hunters froze for a second, then burst into laughter. Harsh, metallic sounds that echoed in the warehouse. To them, he was nothing. Just a man with no armor, no power, no worth. But Daniel didn't back down. His knuckles turned white around the pipe. "You hear me?" he shouted, louder now. "If you want them, you'll have to kill me first." The laughter stopped. One hunter tilted his head as if curious. Another barked something sharp, and they spread out, circling him like predators around stubborn prey. The first swung his weapon toward Daniel. Daniel dodged clumsily, swinging the pipe with all his strength. The metal crashed against the hunter's arm, sparks flying. The force jolted Daniel's bones, pain shooting up his arms, but the hunter stumbled back half a step. Surprised, Daniel gasped, chest burning, but he forced himself upright again. He was not strong, he was not trained, yet in this moment, He stood taller than he ever had in his life. Another hunter lunged, the weapon whistling through the air. Daniel ducked, the blade grazing his shoulder, tearing his coat. Warm blood trickled down his arm. But he didn't let go of the pipe. He swung again, this time hitting the hunter's mask. The blow rang out, cracking the visor slightly. The hunter snarled, his balance shaken. Daniel's legs shook, his breath ragged. He knew he couldn't last long, but every second he kept them busy was another second for Lyra and Nira to get farther away. That was enough. One of the hunters barked angrily. They regrouped, preparing to strike together. Their weapons glowed faintly in the dark. Deadly and precise, Daniel tightened his grip, his blood dripping on the dusty floor. His vision blurred, but he refused to step back. "Come on," he whispered to himself. "I won't let you have them." The door at the back of the warehouse suddenly creaked. A faint sound, but sharp in the silence. Daniel's heart leapt. He knew who it was, Lyra. She hadn't run far. From the shadows near the broken wall, two glowing eyes appeared. Lyra stood there, trembling but fierce. She had returned. Nira clung to her hand, her face pale with fear. Daniel's stomach dropped. "No!" he shouted. "Go! Get out of here!" But Lyra didn't move. Instead, she stepped forward, her glowing lines brightening across her arms and neck. The hunters turned sharply, their visors locking on her, their attention shifting away from Daniel. Daniel saw the danger instantly. "Don't," he begged, his voice cracked. "They'll take you, run!" But Lyra's eyes blazed with something new. Not just fear, but defiance. She whispered something in her language, and the glowing lines on her skin pulsed brighter. The hunters hesitated, their movements sharp with recognition. They knew what she was. What her blood carried, Daniel realized it too. Lyra was making herself the target, drawing their focus away from Nira. Away from him, the hunters stepped toward her. Weapons ready, Daniel roared, throwing himself forward with the last of his strength. He swung the pipe wildly, striking one across the chest, knocking him back into a crate. The wood splintered, dust filling the air. Another hunter shoved Daniel hard, sending him crashing to the floor. The pipe clattered away, pain shot through his ribs. His body screamed to give up. But as he looked up, he saw Lyra standing tall, her small body glowing like a star in the shadows, and Nira clutching her hand, terrified but alive. Daniel forced himself to rise. He stumbled, blood dripping, but he stood between the hunters and the girls again. His voice broke but carried through the warehouse. "They are not yours," he shouted. "They are not property. They are not things. They are people, and I'll protect them until my last breath." The hunters froze, not because of his strength, but because of his will. His words cut through the air, heavier than any weapon. For a heartbeat, even they hesitated. The silence that followed was thick. Then somewhere outside, another sound rang out, a siren, sharp and rising. The city patrol, drawn by the noise of the fight. The hunters cursed in their language. Their visors flickered as they exchanged quick signals. Time was running out with one last glare. They retreated toward the door, melting into the night before the patrol could arrive. The warehouse grew silent again, only Daniel's ragged breaths filling the space. His knees buckled, but he caught himself. Lyra rushed to his side, her glowing eyes wide with shock and something else, respect, gratitude. You stood for us," she whispered, her voice trembling. Daniel gave a weak laugh, though pain burned his chest. "Told you. If they wanted you, they'd have to go through me." Nira pressed against him, her tiny hands clutching his torn sleeve. Don't leave us," she whispered through tears. Daniel looked at them both, his vision blurring. His body was broken, but his heart was firm. He placed a shaking hand on their shoulders. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, his voice soft but steady. "You're safe with me. You're family now." Lyra's glowing eyes filled with tears. She lowered her head in a silent bow. Her grip on his arm tight. The warehouse was still again, but nothing was the same. In one night, Daniel had gone from feeding strays to defying hunters, from walking alone to protecting two alien sisters. And though the danger was far from over, one truth shone brighter than the fear. When a human chooses to protect, even the galaxy must take notice.